So now we're going to go over a new category of the sell signals, and this revolves around distribution. Distribution is an extremely important part of our system. Bill considers distribution as his primary method for getting in and out of the market. If he sees heavy distribution, even in the absence of other sell signals, he gets very nervous. So that's why we have made distribution such an important part of our system as well. We do have a lot of other requirements, but distribution is weighed very heavily in our system. So basically, what is distribution? Distribution is heavy volume selling in the market. And we define that as a day in which the NASDAQ or major market index closes down 0.2% or more on volume that's higher or equal to the previous day. So down 0.2% on higher volume than the previous day. That's the basic definition of distribution. Distribution makes us nervous because institutions are the driving force in the markets. They make up the vast majority of the volume. So if you see heavy volume selling, that is an indication that institutions may be exiting the market. So we're going to act on that. Now, there's another form of distribution, and we call that stalling. Now, stalling actually occurs on an up day. Regular distribution is heavy volume on a down day. Stalling occurs when you're at or near new highs, and you close typically in a weak fashion in the lower 25% of the range on heavier volume than the previous day. Okay, so another way to say that is heavy volume without further upside price progress. Now, in the back of your books, in your glossary, we have a very detailed definition or criteria for a stall day. And I don't want you to look at it now. It's something that we spent months formulating with Bill. And basically, we showed Bill all the days that were potentially stall days. And he is the person that defined whether he believed it was stalling action or not. And then we basically fit the criteria to match what he felt was stalling. It's quite a lengthy and a bit confusing definition. So you don't need to look at it now. It's something you can kind of look at your leisure when you get home. But what you need to know now is that the stalling, again, is going to occur at or near new highs. It's going to close in the lower part of the range, typically, on an increase in volume. And we're going to look at a bunch of stall days here so you can kind of get a mental image of what they look like. Now, when it comes to stall days, there's a little bit of a nuance on how we're going to treat them in the overall distribution count. We are only going to count the first stall day. The first stall day we see we're going to count as a distribution day. But for every stall day after that, we're going to require there to be at least one additional day of regular distribution than stalling. So for example, if you have 2 stall days, we're going to require 3 days of regular distribution in order to count that second stall day. When I say regular distribution, I mean down 0.2% or more and heavier volume than the previous day. So our regular definition. If you have 3 days of stalling, then you're going to need 4 days of regular distribution in order to count that third stall day, and so forth. The reason why we have this kind of little trick in there and how we count it is when we were studying our market cycles, what we found is that there were periods when you had a lot of stalling action and the indices didn't fall. A lot of stalling action without regular distribution, and the indices kept going up. So stalling without regular distribution isn't as predictive of market tops. That's what we found in our studies. That's why we require there to be a combination in order to count the stalling days. So let's talk about how many days of distribution matter. Now, it used to be back in the 80s and the 90s and even earlier that 3 or 4 days of distribution were enough to start to put your market at risk. But as the markets have broadened in terms of volume and market participants and number of issues traded and so forth, we found that it takes more and more distribution in order to really matter. So currently, in the current time frame, 6 days of distribution over the past 25 days is going to represent a full count of distribution. And we are going to begin to sell on that 5th day of distribution. Okay, and we call it distribution -1 because over time the number of days have changed. So when 4 days represented a full count of distribution, we would start to act on the 3rd day. In the current time frame, 6 days of distribution is full. We start to act on the 5th day of distribution. So we're going to act on the 5th day of distribution, that's your S3. Full distribution is an S4. We're going to act on it, and we're going to continue to act on distribution up until the 7th and 8th days. So it's possible that we can have 4 sell signals just based on distribution alone. That's a very heavy weighting, and that's the way Bill analyzes the markets. So let's go over some examples of counting sell signals based on distribution. We're on page 68. So we're moving up along the market, and right here you get a distribution day. It would also be a downside reversal day, but right now we're just focused on distribution. So there's 1 day of distribution, 2 days of distribution, 3 days of distribution. Keep in mind this is in 1997. In 1997, 5 days represented a full count. So when are we going to act on the first day of distribution? On the 4th day, right? Okay, so we've got 3 days. We're not doing anything yet on distribution. Here's your 4th day. So that's an S3. And then here's a stall day. So take a look at that stall day so you can kind of get a mental image of it. You're not necessarily at new highs, but you're in the range of new highs. Volume is up on that day. You can see volume is quite heavy, and you close well off the highs in the lower half of the range. So that's a stall day. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're at a full count of distribution in this time frame. So that's another S4. And then you get another day here. So now you're at 6 days of distribution over the prior 25 days. So that's another sell signal. Let's go to page 69 and do a few more examples. So this is in 2010. So in 2010, 6 days of distribution is a full count of distribution. So we're going to start selling on the 5th day. So we've got day 1, here's a stall day, 3rd day of distribution, 4th day, here's your 5th day, there's your S3, and then you get a 6th day here. So you have full distribution here. So your first sell signal here, the S4 is here. Go to page 78, and we're going to do another example. Now in 78, you can see that we're talking in the mid-90s. So again, 1996, 5 days represented a full count of distribution. So we're going to start selling on the 4th day. So we've got the first day of distribution here. We have a stall day. There's your 2nd day. 3rd day of distribution. And now you get another stall day. So what's our count right now of distribution? 3. Why 3? Second stall doesn't count. Excellent, you guys. So we're not going to count this stall day until we have at least 3 days of regular distribution. So we're going to take that stall day, we're going to put it in our back pocket, and we're going to take it out if we get another day of distribution and count it at that point. So what happens is a couple days later you do get that next day of distribution. So now our count goes from 1 to 3 days to 5. So we're basically going to double count this day as an S3 and an S4. It also so happens that it's a cluster of distribution. It's a completely separate signal we're going to talk about next. Again, this day here, S3 and S4 on that day.
Is that equal to 3 sell signals that can bring your count down later by 3?
Perfect, yes. 3 sell signals on that day. You're going to, let's say your count is at a 5. At the end of the day, your count will be a 2. Each time you have a sell signal, if you have multiple sometimes you might have 5 sell signals in one day. It's rare, but I think we're going to have an example of that when we do our simulation, where a bad break, you break the 21 day, you break the 50 day, you have full distribution. You can have such a horrible day in a very difficult environment where you might be pushed out of the market in one bad day. So yeah, you can have multiple signals on the same day. Okay, so let's go to page 66. We're almost at the end. Now, just like when I talked about the downside reversal, the presumption is you're going to get further weakness, and typically you do get some weakness. The presumption when you have full distribution or distribution piling up is that your market's going to top. The market's going to get weak, and that's usually what happens. You get a lot of distribution, your market runs into trouble. But it doesn't always happen. And especially over the past several years, high distribution has kind of been a faulty indicator. 2013 was a classic year where you had heavy distribution almost the whole way up, and the market just kept trudging higher. So we're going to concede that if the distribution starts to fall off due to time passing or the index continuing to move up, we're going to start eliminating those distribution days as no longer being relevant. So the distribution window is 25 days. When a distribution day moves out of that 25-day window, it's no longer relevant. So it falls off the count. The other way distribution falls off is if the index advances 6% or higher from the close of the distribution day in question. So if the index moves up 6%, then that's basically saying, listen, the market is really strong and that distribution day did not indicate that the market was topping. Clearly, if you're up 6%, the market didn't top. So we're going to say, listen, it wasn't relevant, we're going to lop it off. So when the count falls back to a full count -2, we're going to trigger a buy signal on that day. So in the current environment, when the distribution count falls back to a 4, it's going to be this B10 buy signal. So let's pretend that you have 5 days of distribution in the current environment. 5 days would trigger an S3, right? If one of them drops off and you go back down to 4 days of distribution, you're going to have a buy signal on that day. So let's look at some examples. This is on page 70, and this is in the 2012 time frame. So we've got 4 days of distribution. 3 of them are regular distribution, 1 day is a stall day. Again, I want you to get a mental image of kind of what stalling action looks like so you can recognize it when it happens. So you've got 4 days of distribution here. We haven't done anything, right? We don't act until our 5th day. There's our 5th day of distribution, so that's an S3 on that day. Now, on this day, look what happened. You got another day of distribution, but this one fell off on the same day. Remember, that 25-day window is always moving. So this one fell off, and this one came on the same day. So your overall count didn't even change. You were at 5 days before. One came off, one came on the same day. You're still at 5. So you don't act on that. And then you get a 6th day within a 25-day window. You're at full distribution there. Let's look at page 71 and do another example. Now here we're in the 1998 time frame, so we're back to a period where it only took 5 days to represent a full count. So we have 3 days of distribution here. There's your 4th, so that's an S3 at this point. Now this one falls off due to time. So we had 1, 2, 3, we had 4 days of distribution, we had a S3, and then this one came off, so we're back at a full count -2, we're back to 3, so that's when you get a buy signal. And you can see in this time frame you had distribution piling up, but the market kept moving up. So we're going to treat it as wasn't so relevant. Okay, let's move on and do another example. This is on page 72. This is in the 2004 time frame, so in that time frame we still only needed 5 distribution days for a full count. So we have 3 days, we're going to act on the 4th one, we're going to have a S3. So there's your 4th distribution day in 25, there's your sell signal. Now look what happens here. On this day, the market has moved up 6% from the close of these 2 days. So you go from 4 days of distribution back down to 2 days. So we're going to trigger that B10. Okay, your distribution count fell by a full count -2, or in this case, -3. More fell off than even needed to fall off. Now you get another day of distribution, you're back at 3 days. There's a 4th day, so now you're going to trigger another sell signal based on distribution. And now one falls off again. So you're back to 3. So it's going to be a buy signal, a distribution day fall off. Let's do one more example of this on page 73. And again, we're in a time frame here in the early 2000s where 5 days represented a full count. So we've got 3 days of distribution. This one comes off when the market has this big rally up here. So we still have now 2 days. That one fell off. There's a 3rd day. There's a stall day in here. So that's a total of 4 days of distribution. That's going to give us our first signal based on distribution, our S3. And then this one falls off due to the index moving up. So it's going to be a buy signal. So you can see sometimes the distribution does not indicate that the market's topping. In this case, the market was really just consolidating and going sideways and did not really indicate the market was going to roll over. So it was a tough period. When sell signals went off on distribution, it kept you from getting too heavily invested. But finally, when the market started to take off, we started to drop that distribution off. So we don't want to force ourselves into thinking that, hey, distribution's high, the market's definitely going to top, because it might not. Any questions on the S3 and S4? Yeah?
I see after the futures is an index moves up 6% or more, but it lost at the bottom, and it still counts as a ready day.
Yeah, okay, great question, thank you. So the question was, well, look at this day here. You close at the bottom of the range. It really, by the end of the day, it certainly wasn't a very strong day. We are still going to lop off this distribution day because the rule is the index has to move 6% higher on an intraday basis. So regardless of where it closes, if the NASDAQ moves 6% or more from the close of a distribution day on an intraday basis, then that distribution day is no longer relevant. I don't care where it closes, but if it moves up 6% on an intraday basis, we're going to say that the distribution day isn't relevant. We tested this a number of different ways. Believe me, we did a lot of testing when we did this with Justin, and this is what we came up with, which gave the best overall performance over the 42 years. We tested 5%, 6%, 7%, all kinds of iterations, and this is what gave us the best performance. Okay, then let's talk about the very last sell signal, and that is the distribution cluster. And we're on page 67. So in doing our studies, we found that when the distribution begins to pile up in a very short period of time, is more of a cause for concern. Okay, and generally it was more indicative of market weakness. So 4 days of distribution over a week is going to be more concerning than 4 days that happen over 4 or 5 weeks. So if you see a pile up in a very short period of time, we are going to count that as a sell signal. Now, we studied all kinds of different time frames with the distribution, and again, with the help of Justin and the amazing database that he provided for us. And we found that 4 days of distribution within a rolling 8-day period was the most predictive of further market weakness. So that's what we stuck with. That's the number that gave us the best performance over the long term. So let's define the cluster. We're going to have a sell signal if your distribution count increases to 4 within an 8-day period. We are going to continue to sell based on the cluster each time you get an increase in that number. So let's just say 4 out of 4 days, 4 distribution days in a row, you get a sell signal, the cluster. The next day, you have another distribution day. A 5th day, we're going to count it as another sell signal. It could go all the way up to 8 out of 8. Now, it's never happened, but it theoretically could happen. But each time you get an increase in the amount of distribution within an 8-day period, we are going to count that as an additional sell signal. We are going to count all stall days. So unlike the S3 and S4, where the stalling, we require there to be more distribution than stall, for this sell signal, and again, treat this completely separate from the distribution we just spoke about. In terms of a cluster, all stalling is going to count. It's possible to have 4 stall days in a short period of time. We're going to count that as a sell signal. Once the cluster count resets back down to 3 within an 8-day period, it resets. So let's say you're at 4 within an 8-day period, and then one of them drops off. You're back down to 3 days within 8 days. If you get another one within an 8-day period, you're going to get another sell signal. So it resets at 3, and if it increases again back up to 4, you get another count. Well, we'll go over a couple of examples. And we're going to talk about the last one later when we introduce the power trend, but this cluster of distribution is going to put a power trend under pressure. Ignore that for now. We're going to talk about that in great detail later. All right, let's do some examples. On page 74, we've got 3 days of distribution within 4 days. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3 days of distribution over the past 8 days. If you get a 4th day, you do. So here we are. We look back 8 days, and you've got 4 days of distribution within this 8-day period, so that is a cell signal. Go to page 75, let's do another example. Now here's an interesting case. This is a stall day, and we represent it with an H. It's a special kind of stall day. The H stands for heavy volume without further price progress up. Normally, a stall day, and all the ones you've seen so far, the stall day closes in the lower part of the range. It's rare, but Bill has identified a number of stall days that actually close in the upper part of the range. Okay? Again, there's a lengthy description in your glossary on this, but it's only happened 12 times in 42 years, so I wouldn't get too concerned about it. All right? So anyway, that is a stall day. So we have 3 days of distribution, and now we've got 4 within the prior 8 days. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 4 out of the last 6 days, and well, out of 8 actually. These are up days. And then what happens is you get another day of distribution in here. So now we're looking, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So here are your 8 days with the shading here. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 days of distribution. So what happened in here is you had 4 days here. Here's your first cluster. You have 4 days here. Now 1 falls out and 1 comes in. So your cluster count didn't change, right? You went from 4 days within 8. 1 came off, 1 came back on. So nothing happened. You're still at 4 within an 8-day period. So we're not going to count that stall day as another cell signal with regard to the cluster. But then another day is added, and so we are going to count that as an increase in the cluster count. Let's do one more example on page 76. So we've got a stall day in here, and one of those rare stall days, plus 4 days of distribution. On this day here, we get our 4th day of distribution in 8 days. So we're going to have a cluster count. Also so happens that you have an S3 on that day. Again, the S3 and S4 are completely separate from the cluster, but you can have multiple cell signals on that same day. Very often, when you're experiencing a cluster, you're going to be in the midst of a very heavy distribution period in the market, so you might have multiple cell signals based on distribution on the same day. And then you get another day of distribution, so you're at full distribution, and you have another cluster go on here. So that's it. So any questions on the cluster? Yeah?
Are these distribution days and other cell signals, do you prioritize those if you're having multiple, or are they like additive, or is it a hierarchy?
And so the question is there a hierarchy in like what cell signals are the most important? No, you're going to have examples where you have multiple cell signals on the same day. Let's pretend you're at a +2 exposure, and you have 3 cell signals on the same day. Well, +2, -3, you can only go as low as 0. So one of those won't matter. There's no hierarchy. Doesn't matter which ones you would act on. The important thing is that you recognize that they occurred, and basically when we go over the simulation, you'll see that we gray out the ones that we don't need. But there's no hierarchy. But if the cell signals are neutralizing the bi signals, we act on all of them until your count goes back to 0. They all have equal importance. We're not saying that any one is more important than another. They're all relevant.